Hi, welcome back to Chapter by Chapter. This is On Liberty, Chapter 2. Mill believes that even if a government is completely representative of the people, it's dangerous for it to even possess the ability or the power to stifle thought and discussion, even if that power goes on unused. If mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. The dissenting opinion offers an important service to those who hold the majority opinion, and therefore society. To start, let's look at two hypotheses. First, that the majority opinion is incorrect and the dissenting opinion is correct, and this creates an opportunity for people to trade their error for the truth. And the second is that the majority opinion is correct and the dissenting opinion is incorrect. And this can create a clearer and livelier perception of the truth, because it is now clashed with error. And the bulk of the middle of this chapter is about these two hypotheses, with some side, albeit related tangents. So first, let's look at hypothesis number one. The dissenting opinion has been true all along, and if you swim in the mainstream, your life is a lie. Those who wish to suppress the dissenting opinion will of course deny its truth.
This is a lie.
It's not a lie. I saw him. I fought him.
Detention, Mr. Potter.
But what gives them the right to make this judgment call for the rest of mankind and exclude others from being able to judge the dissenting opinion for themselves?
Enough! Enough.
Additionally, to refuse a hearing to an opinion because they are sure that it is false is to assume that their certainty is the same thing as absolute certainty. All silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. People, more generally speaking, are quite accepting of the idea that they are imperfect and have the ability to make mistakes. But when it comes to people holding opinions, it suddenly becomes very difficult for them to conceive that maybe there might be a possibility they're wrong. Sometimes. I guess I understand for some people it might be hard to imagine that if they've never themselves been wrong before in the past, such as myself. This sort of mental block becomes even more difficult when you have people that don't really come into contact with others that hold dissenting opinions from their own. This makes them more likely to view their own opinions as a sort of representative of absolute truth.
It is me, your opinion.
Now I guess that sort of explains me, because I just live in this white box on YouTube. For those that do come into contact with lots of different people who hold many different varieties of opinion and that differ from themselves, they only really place these ideas of absolute truth on the ideas that they see reflected across the spectrum of opinions. And this just goes to show that our ideas of truth and what ideas we feel confident in is completely shaped by the world that we come into contact with. It is determined by our age, our country, the sect of church we might belong to, our class, our political party, and the time in history we happen to be living in. Ages are no more infallible than individuals and are rejected by the present. The majority of people in the past have held at least some opinions now known to be completely false, and have done or approved of things that nobody would support today. Then why do we always have this feeling that there's some degree of rationality between what is right and what is wrong? Well, there must be some degree of rationality behind human conduct, otherwise the majority of human history would just be complete chaos. But it is part of human nature to reflect and correct errors that we have made along the way. And this is all done in pursuit of some kind of ideal conduct. And all this reflecting and correcting cannot be done merely by having experiences. There has to be some amount of discussion to determine how we're going to interpret that experience and what we're going to learn from it. Very few facts are able to tell their own story without comments to bring out their meaning. We can trust human judgment only when it has these means of correcting itself closely at hand.
Come. Open discussion.
I need to keep you safe.
And the individual who can be trusted is the one who has opened themselves up to criticism of their opinions and conduct. And that individual has also listened to a variety of opinions in detail, including the ones that contain fallacy. In order to fully understand a topic, an individual must see it from every perspective from which it can be seen, and from every character of mind that can see it. No wise man ever acquired his wisdom in any mode but this, nor is it the nature of human intellect to become wise in any other manner. This is not to say that any wise man or society that has done this is beyond error, but rather, at their best, they are the best that their time period and context could produce. At present, people rely on their opinions not because they believe them really to be true per se, but because they simply don't know what to do without them. Or they believe that the claims of their opinion hold a certain importance to society, like they support society's stability or reliable function. They feel that certain beliefs are so important for the well-being of society that it is the government's job to protect these beliefs just as much as it is their job to protect any other interest of society. This might align with something sort of like laws made solely on the basis of morality. This reliance on utility means that the value of an opinion, meaning its relation to the truth or reality, no longer needs to be proven right or wrong. But here's the catch. Ideas of utility are subjective. How useful something is an opinion, and therefore requires just as much discussion as anything else does. Additionally, it is not enough for somebody to merely defend the utility of their opinion, they must also defend the opinion itself. This is because the truth of an opinion is part of its utility. An opinion can't truly be useful to society if it is fundamentally wrong. The problem is that simple usefulness does not apply itself equally across all members of society. Something might be more useful for some people than it is for other people, and therefore there can be no fair discussion in regards to usefulness. When law or public feeling do not permit the truth of an opinion to be disputed, they are just as little tolerant of a denial of its usefulness. This usually happens when some force, usually the leaders of the country, assume themselves to hold the absolute truth and deny the possibility that they could ever be wrong. And they use this to justify suppressing any counter-opinion from being heard. This pattern of behavior has led to some of the most shameful moments in human history. This includes the persecution of Socrates, Jesus Christ, and perhaps most famous of all, Marcus Antonius. However, Mill says this statement is false, and there are in fact multiple occurrences throughout history that we can see far-reaching consequences from the truth being suppressed. Legal or even social penalties have often been sufficient in crushing people's quest for the truth. Although truth, even if suppressed for centuries, has a tendency to resurface, sometimes multiple times, until it finally happens to resurface in a time where society isn't really in a position to suppress it any longer. Although the suppression of opinion today may not be so obvious as it was in periods in the past, sometimes in which people were sentenced to death via lion, we should not flatter ourselves by thinking that we're totally free of any suppression of thought and opinion. And where there is a strong, permanent leaven of intolerance in the feelings of a people, which at all times abides in the middle class of this country, it needs but little to provoke them into actively persecuting those whom they have never ceased to think as proper objects of persecution. It is the feelings that people have towards those who hold different beliefs from themselves that prevents England from being a place of mental freedom. While subtleties in the legal system help strengthen these stigmas, it is the stigmas themselves that make the restrictions on opinion practically unnecessary. It is also worth noting that Mill says the risks against you if you have an alternative opinion are higher if you are somebody who is economically insecure. While in modern day those with differing opinions are not thrown to lions, Social intolerance prevents us from engaging with and therefore diffusing opinions which are potentially incorrect. This leads these alternative opinions not to die out, but to quietly smolder on the margins of society, marginal circles of thinking. Additionally, this sacrifices the mental courage of mankind and stagnates intellectual progress. In times without mental freedom, the greatest thinkers narrow their thoughts down to the small and practical matters of life and abandon daring speculation on the highest subjects. But freedom of thinking is not only to enable great thinkers, it also enables average people to meet their full potentials. And this is equally, if not more, important. In times of mental slavery, there have often still been great thinkers, but very seldom an intellectually active population. And this is important because it is usually the intellectually active population which has brought out some of the most remarkable periods of history. Only in these periods was the yoke of authority broken and the conditions of the people in Europe improved. Although Mill writes that there are still groups of people, although fewer then than in the past, who don't believe that anything good can come from being questioned, from authority being questioned. Wherever they hold influence, they make it impossible for the received opinion to be rejected thoughtfully, although it may still be rejected in other ways, which are more rash and ignorant. Even the most rash and ignorant display of rejection is technically discussion in that it says, "I reject this," and it is true that shutting down all discussion entirely is seldom possible. Now let's move on to hypothesis number 2. The dissenting opinion is in fact false, and the received opinion, or more dominant opinion, is true. First of all, even if we assume that somebody's opinion is true, they still should be aware of the grounds of their own opinions. Now let's take a man, and he has an opinion, and his reasons for that opinion are good. But if he is unable to argue down a counter opinion, which is only really done by truly understanding the essence of that counter opinion, then he doesn't really have the grounds to prefer one of those opinions from the other. It won't be enough for that counter opinion to be presented to him by a professor or some other kind of third party. He must come into contact with the intricacies of the other opinion from those who actually hold that other opinion. Only when he is met by the full persuasive power of the other opinion can he identify which portion of the truth, again assuming that his opinion is true, will overturn those counter-arguments. He must feel the whole force of the difficulty which the true view of the subject has to encounter and dispose of. Else he will never really possess himself of the portion of the truth which meets and removes that difficulty. Mill says that 99% of educated men are in this state of never fully exploring the truth. Now, many may argue it is not fair to judge average people for not doing this, because average people don't have the time or even the capacity of fully exploring the truth. And it should be enough that they hold opinions that they trust intellectual elites have fully discussed and proved. However, Mill says this does not weaken the case for open speech and discussion, because how can we trust that the difficulty against an opinion has been fully explored if that difficulty is not able to be spoken? How can we know that our current explanation for the truth is satisfactory if objectors are not able to explain what they find to be dissatisfactory? The intellectual elite or theologians need to be exposed themselves to a variety of opinions in order to get closer to the truth, and it is not as if they contain within themselves every character of mind that can view a subject. Transition. When the grounds of an opinion are lost in the absence of discussion, it only follows that the true meaning of that opinion is eventually lost as well. This true opinion may be reduced to taglines or phrases, or only portions of the truth survive, while other portions or important nuances within that truth are lost. This often happens when an idea spreads across a land at a vast rate and eventually settles in and becomes general opinion. It maintains possession of the ground it has gained, but it does not spread or advance intellectually further. And those who hold the opinion now are people who have inherited it rather than personally adopting the idea. And this impacts how the opinion affects their character, as little to no time has been spent really weighing the value of that opinion they hold. Nor are they spending any time weighing the values of potentially new ideas and doctrine. One example of this is how the Christian religion spread, and how the behaviors of Christians themselves had come a long way since the original Christians who had made more of a personal choice to take on the religion, whereas the more modern Christians were more likely to have inherited their religion. When their enemies said, "See how these Christians love one another," a remark not likely to be made by anybody now. More modern Christians tend to take the doctrine less to heart and are more likely to look at other leaders within their Christian community to tell them to what extent they should actually take their own doctrine seriously. So why do some doctrines appear to maintain their life through the course of time much better than others? Or perhaps even take on more life than they had in the first place? The more peculiar the doctrine, the more often it will be questioned. Both teachers and learners go to sleep at their post as soon as there is no enemy in the field. The doctrines that go on undiscussed, their lessons will eventually go to the back of people's minds, and people's opinions and actions will eventually stray away from the original lessons that doctrine had intended to give. This has been referred to as the deep slumber of a decided opinion. This phenomenon ends up being the cause of half of man's errors, because without the truth of the lesson being more deeply thought about, it won't really have an influence over people's actions. A good example is somebody who never really took taking their teeth brushing seriously, and then they go to the dentist and have to endure a root canal, and after that they make sure to diligently floss and brush their teeth every single night. Now, it's not as if before that root canal they had no idea that brushing teeth would prevent cavities, but it wasn't until they had a meaningful experience with that truth that they really felt it deeply and had it influence their actions. Now, none of this means that Mill is saying that it is best if every doctrine out there is constantly called into question. In fact, as society progresses, we should be getting closer to the truth and having to call less and less things into question. But Mill is saying that it's important for people to spend some time thinking about and really understanding the grounds of their own opinions, even if their opinions are correct. Now, for the last part of this chapter, we arrive at our third secret hypothesis, which is also kind of the most important hypothesis because it occurs way more often than either one or two does. And that hypothesis is this: that rather than one opinion fully embodying what is true and the other fully embodying none of what is true, they both share the truth somewhere between them, or the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Sometimes the non-conforming opinion represents a portion of the truth that has been left out by the received opinion, and often it is the underdog of the two opinions, perhaps the newer one, that represents a portion of the human needs that have been neglected by the prevailing opinion. But it's usually the case that holders of either opinion claim that their opinion embodies the entire truth rather than just a portion of a larger truth. Hence, even in revolutions of opinion, one part of the truth usually sets while another rises. Although that new fragment of truth is more wanted, more adapted to the needs of time than that which it displaces. Opinions which contain part of the truth that is omitted by the current received opinion should be considered precious, and we should still consider it precious even if it's all jumbled up with a bunch of falsities. We can also observe how political parties tend to embody really one element of the human needs. There is usually a general split in the political ideologies where one party represents order and stability, whereas the other represents progress and reform. Other opposing concepts include democracy versus aristocracy, property versus equality, cooperation versus competition, luxury versus abstinence, sociality versus individuality, and liberty versus discipline. And always, while one of these concepts is rising in society, the other one is setting. Also, truth, in the great practical matters of life, is often a matter of reconciling and combining these different concepts. Few are able to figure it out in just one go, and it is often a matter of struggling through trial and error over time to identify what combination of these things we really need. Well, that's it for this chapter. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. And for those who are reading along, I would love to hear in the comments section what parts you found most interesting. Personally, I was a little struck at one moment when Mill seemed to exactly describe the Republican and Democrat parties in the United States. It just goes to show that our particular time period isn't so unique and isolated as we sometimes feel like it is. Anyways, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for another chapter of Das Kapital.